As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. Leonard Sweet here, excited to be with you for vlog number 102 for Sunday of Lent 2022. Our scripture passages, Deuteronomy 26, 1 to 11, the story of God's promise for the land that is to come, and this wonderful, a wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien. I love that. Was my ancestor. I have my only daughter is having a daughter, and the question is, what do you want her to call you? And I'm trying to convince that ancestor would be a good possibility, but it's not going very well. But come on, support me. Ancestor, a great possibility. The psalm, I learned this psalm by heart very early on. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Now, I know that's not the best translation, but there's something missing. And you who live in the shelter of the Most High, who abide in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust. I miss some of the lyricism and the mellifluity of the Old English. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Romans 10, 8b to 13. The word is near you, on your lips and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. I love this passage. We are going to do, though, the temptation passage from Luke 4, 1 to 13. And I'm going to do something very different today, and it may upset some of you, but it's my vlog. And you've actually been you've been taught and learned maybe that you shouldn't do this, but I am tired. Semiotics is basically, you got a puzzle out in front of you, and what we've done for 500 years, higher critical, textual critical, all the critical stuff, is we've made the pieces of that puzzle smaller and smaller. So we started with a 100-piece puzzle, chapter and verse. How many pieces of the puzzle did we make in the Bible? We've been making even smaller and smaller. And but we need to put the pieces, there's a pattern behind the pieces, there's a whole picture behind the pieces, there's a whole story behind the pieces. I want to put the story together. That's what semiotics is. You're putting the pieces of the puzzle together so you can see the whole picture. Not making the puzzle from a 1,000-piece puzzle to a 5,000-piece puzzle to a 20,000-piece puzzle to a 100,000-piece puzzle. I want to put it together. So we are going to deal with the two temptations. The Genesis 3 temptation, the first temptation of the first Adam, and the Luke 4 temptation of the last Adam. I've been through, to research this, I've been through all sorts of theological encyclopedias, theological dictionaries, theological discourses, companions, handbooks, and nobody wants to talk about the fall. Nobody wants to talk about the temptation. It's really interesting. There was one person, his name is Brian Rossner, who's principal of Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia, known by God, a biblical theology of personal identity, where I did, and he really helped me with this and gave me the courage to do what I'm going to do today. So thank you, Professor Rosner. And also ancient Christian commentaries. Thank you, Tom Oden, who put together the ancient church fathers and mothers and what they said about the early scriptures. And here's St. John Chrysostom from the 4th century, who also, remember the Archbishop of Constantinople, important to Byzantine Christianity. Here is his emboldening me to do what I'm going to do today. This is a quote. Thus was the devil defeated by the very instruments of his victory. At the foot of the tree in paradise, the devil had overthrown Adam. On the cross, Christ had trampled down the devil. The wood of old forced humanity into the abyss. That of the cross led mankind out from it. Through the first wood, man was thrown, bound and naked, into darkness. By the second wood, the one that defeated mankind was conquered, stripped of his weapons, and offered as a spectacle for the whole universe. The death of Adam came also to his descendants. The death of Christ gave life, even to those that were born before him. Now, if you remember the story that we don't have here in the lectionary passages, but we're going to bring in the Genesis 3 story, the serpent that tricked Eve into eating the forbidden fruit, everything is predicating this was Satan himself. And the book of Revelation states this explicitly. So I'm just not reading something here frivolously. That snake who fools everyone on earth is known as the devil and Satan. That's Revelation 12:9. So Satan tempts the first Adam and Eve in the garden. Satan tempts the last Adam in the wilderness. John 8:44. For there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. This is Satan, the deceiver, the father of lies, whose native language is lying. Carl Jung said there was two people that he just couldn't heal, and one was a chronic liar, a person whose native language was, they just could not tell the truth. They had to lie. Their native language was lying. So I want us to look at these two stories of temptation, these two archetypal temptation stories. And my thesis is that it has basically, this is a question. These are both temptations over the nature of identity, which I think is at the heart of much of all of this culture. We're in a crisis of identity today. Who are we? And how do we know who we are? And by whom are we known? So I'm placing identity issues at the heart of these temptation stories. In Western cultures, when you are born, you get a number. In Eastern cultures, like let's take Korea, for example, when you are born, your name gets added to a family tree. In other words, from the very beginning in Western cultures, you're defined statistically. You're a number. You're isolated, abstract number. In Eastern cultures, now I'm not sure that South Korea may today be adding a number to that family tree, but for centuries and up until, as far as I know, still today, from birth, you're not defined as an isolated, autonomous individual that has no relationships. You're defined by your birth relationally from the very beginning. Your name is added to a story, to a family tree. So you're defined by a relationship. Now, you may get a number too, but you're defined not by numbers, but by narratives, not by statistics, but by stories, the story of that family. So where is your identity to be found? And I think if we read carefully these two temptation stories, that we will see that this question of identity, notice how, if you are the Son of God, if you be who you say you be, That's at heart an identity question. Now, I don't know if you've seen this Netflix special, Inventing Anna. I've tried to watch it a couple times. I've skipped over a lot, so I don't really know the whole plot. But one of the places where I kicked in is where the reporter who's trying to do a story on Anna Delvey, who is this kind of this mysterious figure who is able to manipulate people into giving her millions and millions of dollars, or at least funding her to the tune of millions and millions of dollars, even if they don't give her actual money. She's doing a story, and she finally she wants to get to the root of who Anna is. Inventing Anna is the title of it. So she actually goes to Germany, and Anna's supposed to have a German father who's this big entrepreneur, and she's supposed to be living on this immense trust fund. But when she gets to Germany, she finds out that is also too a lie, and that her German father and mother, who she meets, are just kind of plain, everyday, normal citizens. And she keeps pressing him, but Anna's so different than you all are. There's got to be some backstory here. Are you sure you're not hiding hoards of money out in the woods somewhere? And Anna's mother has this to say, and I'll never forget it. We think our children come from us, but our children come through us. Let me just pause there. We think our children come from us, but our children come through us. They are who they will be. And I think this is at the heart of what is going on at these two temptation stories, these archetypal temptation narratives. Every birth of every human being is a miracle story. It's a divine miracle, every birth. A divine miracle, a divine gift. But do we come from God, or do we come through God? Is that divine miracle from God, or is that divine miracle through the means that God has set up? Do we come from God with a divine destiny and promise and identity? Or do we come through God with self-made destiny and self-made identity? Do we have identities apart from our Maker and Creator? Do we come from God? Or do we just come through God? If you are the Son of God. Who is a human being? What is a human being? Who are Adam and Eve? Who is Jesus? Who's the last Adam? Who's the second Adam? Are Adam and Eve and Jesus truly children of God? And if so, how do children behave? And how do they relate to their parents? In other words, do we have a DIY identity from scratch, a self-made self? Do it yourself, DIY. Or do we have a divine identity from story, a DIS? Not a DIY, but a DIS, a divine identity from story, a God-made self. In the DIY, self-made self, fulfillment and freedom is found in finding yourself, discovering who you are, apart from God, apart from your birth story. In the divine story, identity, the divine identity from story, the DIS, fulfillment and freedom is found in trusting God, in trusting the story, in resisting satanic lies, and finding your identity in being known and loved by God. Now, there's a lot going on in these tandem temptation stories. Let's compare the temptations, and the similarities and contrasts between Genesis 3 and Luke 4, Matthew 4 are really striking. Both of them are about wanting what you can't have, or having what you can't have. For Adam and Eve in the garden, they had all the food in the world. The whole garden was there. All the food was there. It was theirs. But they couldn't have one thing, which is the precise thing they wanted. They wanted the one thing they couldn't have, even though they had everything else. For Jesus in the desert, he had no food. He was famished. He was starving to death and was offered what he couldn't have. Just turn these stones into bread, and did not give in to the temptation. Adam succumbed to temptation because he chose Eve, the mother of everything, but he chose Eve in his own way. Jesus resisted temptation because he chose people everywhere and everywhere, but he chose people everywhere in God's way, not in his own way. Jesus refuses to play the devil's game and uses the devil's devices to defeat the devil. The end, Jesus said, does not justify the means. So I will not use any means, no matter how glorious your end is, Satan. The first Adam and the first Eve, well, it's a good end, so the end justifies the means. When Satan defeats Adam and Eve in the garden, Adam and Eve are driven out of the garden, separated from the tree of life. When Satan fails to defeat Jesus, the last Adam in the desert, Satan withdraws until an opportune time. Oh, that's Luke 4:13. And that opportune time returned the Mount of Olives. Both of these temptation stories are glass case exhibits that the most perilous times in life are when you are riding the crest of the wave. And when you are at your highest point, feeling all the success and all the adulation and adoration of the world and the crowds, that's when you are most vulnerable to trip up and to step up and to the tempter's snare. It's natural. There's something natural about this. When you give birth, I mean, when I was in graduate school, I went to seminary and a PhD program, MDiv and PhD at the same time. So I was taking 30 hours a semester for like 3 years. And I was studying so hard. And one of the hardest things was when I would study so hard and get a good grade, I get depressed. Immediately. It's also called post-achievement syndrome. Postpartum depression. You give birth and you get depressed. There's something about creativity and the creative process that after you give birth to a project or a person or any kind of achievement, you go down. There comes lag time. After a triumphant victory over temptation or a Mount Carmel or a Mount Tabor experience with Christ, you can find yourself falling and failing and succumbing and going into the pits. Genesis 3 happens, think about it, after we learned that Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. Are you kidding me? I mean, how much more special can life be? Adam and Eve walking the garden with God. I mean, that's how my definition of prayer. And he walks with me and he talks with me. This prayer is walking the garden with God. And God saying, how does your garden grow? I gave you this life, this garden, and how are you cultivating it? How are you conceiving? How are you creating? And what are you growing? Not just for you, but for future generations. And then the temptation. In Matthew 4 and Luke 4, the same thing happens. Immediately preceding the temptation of Jesus is what? How much higher can you go? When heavens part and the whole family, Father and Spirit are there, and you hear, you are my beloved Son who brings me such great pleasure. And then the temptation. Both start with temptations to do with eating. Think about it. But occur in entirely different settings. One is the plenty of the garden, the other in the scarcity of the wilderness. Both scenes, we're going to come back to that in just a second. Both scenes revolve around the reliability and dependability of God's word. Adam and Eve doubt what God said, or at least are led to doubt what God said by the snare. And Eve even added to the divine command something that divine didn't command. Well, we were told not to touch it. No, God did not say don't touch it. God said just don't eat of that tree. God didn't say don't touch that tree. So you're making God even more severe than God is and more commandmented than God's command. Whereas Jesus affirms the sufficiency of God's word and stands firm in Deuteronomy, while Satan is quoting the Psalms, and Jesus keeps quoting the covenant at this kind of shootout at the scriptural, at the Torah corral that's going on. Both scenes reveal the identity of the ones being tempted. Adam and Eve are known by God intimately and personally as his children. They walk the garden, but they doubt God's providence and provisions. Jesus affirms his trust in his Father and proves himself to be God's faithful and obedient Son. And I just missed this until I was working on this for you. In one, the most crafty of the wild animals torment and tempt Adam. Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals God had made. But in the other, after the temptation was over and Jesus had won and defeated Satan, quote, he was with the wild animals and angels attended him. In other words, the covenant with creation, with all of creation that God made with Noah, was being lived out here with the wild animals joining the angels for comfort. Both, I think, set different versions of what it means to be human. And one, following Adam and Eve's example, leads to death. That is, try to be human without the divine, and you get a subhuman life. Because the original design for human was for us to live forever with God. Because you can't be human without the divine. That's what the breath is about. That's what the tree of life is about. The continual breathing of that breath into Adam's nostrils through that tree of life. The separation, the banishment from the garden wasn't from the garden itself. It was from that tree of life. Read it carefully. The other set the course for a new humanity, leading to new life, which is what God initially intended, humanity with the divine. Human with the divine leads to a fully, truly human life, because you can't be fully, truly, authentically human without the divine. So let's just look carefully here at the first story, and so we can refresh our memory. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it. Okay? Whereas Eve's adding, making God more demanding and commanding than God really is. You must not touch it or you will die. We'll certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You got a good tree of life and this tree of knowledge. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was, notice this, first of all, good for food. Number 2, pleasing to the eye. Number 3, desirable for gaining wisdom. Okay. She took some and ate it. And then she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now, we talked before in a previous vlog about that moment of decision where Adam had to decide where his destiny lay. Does it lie with Eve or with God? Because the moment she ate of it, she became mortal, and she did die. She died to immortality. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now notice the three, this is so important here. The three things that she notices about this gift, this tree that Satan, the serpent, was offering her. Number one, it's good for food. It's good for food. Remember, when God created every day, at the end of every day, God said, it is, now the Hebrew here, T-O-V, Tav. It is Tav. We translate it as good. But Tav also means, in Hebrew, yes, it's good, but it's also, you ready? Beautiful. It also can mean true, truthful, wise. So Tav, these multiplicity of meanings, we translate it, and God said it is good, it is good, it is good. And what God came, well, is not good. The first not good was, it's not good that, but it's not good, it's not beautiful, it's not true that Adam should be alone. I will make an Azer for him, for Adam. We have here it's not, it's good for food. And the first temptation of Satan to Jesus was, cast these stones into bread. The second one, notice it is beautiful to the eyes. The second temptation of Satan to Jesus is he took him, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and said, you can have them all. I'll give them to you. They're yours. They've been given to me. I have power and authority over these kingdoms, over the politics of everything, but I'll turn it all over to you. I just want one thing from you. You worship me. The only thing you worship is the beautiful. You worship beauty. That's what you worship. So the second temptation here is the second temptation of Tav. It's the temptation of beauty. This is how important beauty is to God. Remember, God made two kinds of trees that were good for food and trees that were beautiful. They had no other function. They were beautiful. And Satan says, you prostrate yourself and worship me as the beautiful one, the Prince of Light, and I'll turn it all over to you. It's all yours. And then the third temptation, seeing that it was wise. And the third temptation of Satan is, he says, let's read it. The devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you. On their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against a stone. Jesus answered him, it is said, do not put the Lord God to the test. Now, the topmost pinnacle of the temple was probably a royal porch, which towered over the southern extremity of the temple. The walls of Jerusalem were of such height that no one could gaze down from it, any of it, into the ravine below without getting dizzy. And so Satan is taking Jesus to these dizzying heights, the pinnacle of the temple, the pinnacle of privilege, the pinnacle of wealth, the pinnacle of power, the pinnacle of wisdom, and saying, show everyone, in other words, survive a capital punishment, cast yourself down, survive a stoning. You're exempt from the laws that apply to everybody else. Show everyone how wise you are. And how many times have we heard the tempter whisper to us, cast yourself boldly down. You defy. You're the exception. You defy all the other laws. You defy gravity. You defy the rules. You're the exception. And to all of these three temptations, which I believe parallel the temptations in the garden, the first temptation, Jesus says, the ends do not justify the means. My identity is found not by the means that I can come up with to get to that end, even though it may be the end that is a good end, and a beautiful end, and a true end. But my identity is found in God, the creator of all. And sisters and brothers, in a world where identity issues are center, stage center, there's only one story you can trust to build your identity on. And identity requires narrative form for it to have any lasting meaning and purpose. And that is the Jesus story that starts at Genesis and goes all the way to the maps.